So Retroid announced that the Flip 2 and a vertical handheld are on the way for springtime. Now, as far as the vertical handheld, there's not a whole lot of info on that one other than it has a 1x1 screen and it's using that clicky Vita style D-pad that Retroid's been using. So I won't really get into that one a whole lot. Instead, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the Retro Pocket Flip 2. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of info on the Flip 2 either, but we do have 5 generations of Retroid handhelds that we can pull from, and since this is a Gen 2 device, I think we can make a few educated guesses. So before I get into speculation of that, let's talk about what we do know. So we know it's going to have a 16:9 screen, and I'm guessing this is going to be the same screen that we've seen from the Retro Pocket 5. We know it's going to have 2 top set analog sticks, which I've been told are the same analog sticks that Retroid's been using. They just have a new cap on top of it, which is pretty nice to see. 2 front-facing speakers and the same clicky Vita-style D-pad that we've been seeing from Retroid, which again is a nice thing to see. It has start and select, a power button, and it's going to have a home button that's going to act as a back button when you press it shortly. Again, this is coming directly from Retroid, so I'm not just making stuff up on this one. So that's the kind of stuff that we know based on what Retroid said and the render that we saw. But let's also talk about the differences that we can see from the original Flip to the Flip 2, starting off with the analog sticks. So having both of them up top might seem like a little bit of a strange choice, but honestly, I'm okay with it. If you remember the GPD XT, that had the exact same layout, and that was a pretty comfortable handheld to use. Same with the Wii U Pro Controller, which I'm assuming almost nobody watching this video has ever used a Wii U Pro Controller because of obvious reasons. But if you have, you know, that was also a pretty comfortable controller. With this type of layout on a clamshell, we don't have to worry about a screen in the middle of the controllers. So you don't have to stack the D-pad on top or underneath the stick, which means you can stagger them. And since they're going to be staggered, they're going to be pretty comfortable regardless of what you're trying to input. Also, this might make it a really good option if you're really into first-person shooters like Call of Duty or Modern Warfare, I guess. I don't really know what shooters are there. On Android, I just play Call of Duty sometimes, but that's about it. Anyway, it's going to be a good choice for games like that, and it's also going to be a pretty solid choice if you're trying to stream, because we're not going to be dealing with the sliders that we saw in the original Flip. Instead, we're getting these nicer, larger range of motion sticks that, depending on what Retroid does with the caps, could be a pretty good kind of middle ground from a larger stick and those sliders that we were dealing with. Regardless, I'm pretty sure this is going to be an improvement from that. Unless you were a fan of the sliders. I'm not trying to say the sliders were terrible. I just don't think they were ideal, especially with a device that's going to be able to handle so many 3D games. The D-pad looks like it's going to be the same clicky style D-pad that we've seen more recently on retro devices and the Odin handhelds as well. The original Flip was using a rubber membrane D-pad, which was a little bit larger, so that was nice to see, but it was on the stiffer side and just all around not that great compared to the other things we've seen Retroid do. Personally, I like that more classic feel, but I have to admit that these D-pads have been growing on me, and for the most part, everybody seems to agree that the clicky, PS Vita style D-pad is something Retroid does really well. Even though they're on the smaller side, I think this is a good change. For the screen, I'm pretty sure we're going to be getting the same 5.5-inch 1080p OLED screen that we got with the RP5, because that's just kind of something Retroid already did with the Flip, and it would just make sense that they would use that awesome screen that I'm sure they still have a stock of. If you remember, the Flip had the same screen as the 3 Plus, and I don't really see them doing anything different here. Which, if we do get that screen and you look at the thin bezels of the Flip, and then you compare it to the screen size of the RP5, and you look at the RP Mini, we're looking at a handheld that could potentially be more compact than the Mini while still being more comfortable because of that clamshell form factor that just kind of opens up and gives you a lot more to work with. So that is pretty cool to see. Plus, kind of OLED is something that we're all generally expecting now. So I think going back to an IPS screen would be a step backwards. Then again, there is a scenario where I could see them potentially doing that, or maybe even kind of going with a cut down version of what we already saw, just because of the potential price, but I'll talk about that more here in a little bit. Right now though, let's just talk about performance, and if you haven't seen my RP5 and Mini videos and you want to get a more general idea of how this handheld will potentially perform in more demanding systems, go check that out, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be using the same Snapdragon 865 chip, because again, that is something Retroid kind of tends to do with the Flip, and at least they did it with the Flip and the 3 Plus. I'm kind of talking like there's a bunch of examples, when in reality, that's kind of the only time. But it would just make sense since they put it in the Mini and in the 5 that they would just use that again. And Again, if you've seen my videos on those, you know that the 865 on the RP5 and the Mini is performing way better than what you would see on a phone with that, because they've kind of tuned things up and made it to where you can push it a lot more. And thanks to active cooling, you don't have to worry about throttling or nothing like that. So what that means for you is you're looking at a device that's going to be able to handle a wide range of the GameCube PS2 library, some Switch, and a little bit of Wii U, at least until that emulator gets a little bit better. But that is going to make it a device that is going to be very good for just kind of throwing in your backpack, throwing in your bag, and taking it around with you so you can start tackling those backlogs without sacrificing the larger display, which for a lot of people with the Mini, I know there was a complaint that the Mini is great, it's very powerful, but that screen kind of takes you out of it. And I think for larger games, bigger screens in general are just kind of the way to go. It's why I personally prefer playing on a Steam Deck or an LIX, PlayStation 2 and GameCube versus something like the RP5 or even some of the Anbernic handhelds using the T820, just because of that larger display. Now I understand you're not really going to put a Steam Deck in your pocket, so this is something that's very tempting, and there's definitely a big market for these smaller, more powerful devices. Now, as far as battery life, potentially we should be seeing a 5,000 milliamp battery. That's kind of falls in line to what we saw from this generation of Retroid like mainline devices, which again, go watch my video on those if you want to see more on the battery life. But I'll just say that on the RP5, I got about 5 to 7 hours of GameCube and PS2 upscaled. So that is going to be pretty solid battery life, which if you kind of put it all together, you have a small form factor, potentially a great screen, really good battery life. This means this is going to be an awesome handheld to just, again, throw in your bag, take it with you, tackle your backlog. It's not going to use up a lot of space. You don't have to worry about a case. It's just kind of the perfect package if they manage to nail everything. By the way, that red flip on the thumbnail is something I did. Retroid hasn't announced colors, nothing like that, but I'm really hoping red is an option. Same thing with the clear colors. I really hope this brings those back, because as slick as the all glass handhelds might look, they kind of feel like they're starting to look more like phones, and I like my handhelds to look like a gaming device. So hopefully they kind of go back to that. I like the all plastic look. I want my handhelds to feel like handhelds. So if we look at all of that, we look at the potential performance, we look at the benefits of a clamshell, we look at what Retroid's been doing with their current class of devices, I think this has the potential to be a really, really great device and a really compelling option for a lot of people. Where I think this might have some issues, and kind of what I was saying earlier about where we might see them try to cut back to meet a certain price point, is this is most likely going to be more expensive than the RP5, which already came in at $220. Plus, if you live in the States, you have to keep in mind that tariffs are a thing, which could also drive up the price of this handheld. So we're looking at a device that's going to be performance wise in that budget range, but that could potentially come in at about $250 USD, which is starting to get up there. I don't know about you, but when you look at a handful like that and you're starting to pay those mid 200s, once you factor in shipping and taxes and all of that, it's a little bit harder to pull the trigger, especially when you consider that you can pick up a Steam Deck, an LCD Steam Deck, but still for under $300 sometimes at like GameStop or used online. So you do have to consider that, and I'm sure this is going to play in for a lot of people. Now, things I could see them doing to kind of mitigate that is potentially giving us the 6GB version of the 865 and maybe even getting rid of the OLED panel. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'm just saying those could be ways for Retroid to cut back the price so that if they're trying to hit that North American market, they could still fall, at least the US market. I shouldn't say North America. I don't think Canada has to deal with stuff like that, or I don't know. Maybe they do. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off track here. To kind of hit a price point, I hope they don't do that, because I definitely think this could potentially be worth those $250 for the right buyers. But if they're trying to hit a larger market, cheaper is usually better in the eyes of a lot of people. Now, whether you're willing to pay less for something that couldn't have an OLED screen and less RAM is going to be up to you. Personally, the 6 gigs of RAM, I don't think would be the end of the world, because honestly, for emulation, 6 gigs is still enough to get you by, unless you're really trying to push those HC textures. That's the only time where that can be an issue. But generally, even up to lower end Switch emulation, 6 gigs will get you by. But yeah, there's that. 8 gigs would be perfect, but Going to cost a little bit more. OLED panel going to cost a little bit more. Again, this is just speculation on my end, but I think with the way things are going, you definitely have to bring that up and take it into consideration. So, but I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. I just wanted to make a quick video, kind of talk about the flip and see what you guys think. Are you going to be picking one up? Did you already pick up an RP5? Are you happy with that? Or are you mad because you did buy an RP5 and you would have gotten this instead had you known? Personally, I think there was a little bit of a gap there. So fair play to Retroid. I don't really see an issue with that. But whatever you're thinking, let me know in the comments down below. I'm looking forward to it. And thanks for hanging out. I'll see you on the next one.